Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the UWI St. Augustine Faculty of Law Research Skills Seminars or Research Skills Series with our first seminar happening today on conducting legal research. For those of you who have been here with us before, you know that we really focus on our speakers. So I'm going to hand over very shortly to Ms. Raja, our excellent librarian, the best librarian I've ever worked with, to kick us off. But just to let you know, my name is Dr. Emma Perot. I'm a lecturer at the Faculty of Law. I've been here since 2019. I'm very passionate about encouraging and facilitating Caribbean research. Hence, we have launched this series at the faculty to talk to different people about their research experiences, research advice, and what better way to get into this topic for the new academic year than on talking to the people who help us out when we really need to figure out, well, how do we actually go about the research process than librarians. So I'm going to hand over to Ms. Raja now, and she's going to be guiding you through this session today. So Ms. Raja, over to you.
Thank you. So thanks to Dr. Perot and the faculty for having me at this event. Before I start, I do want to say that my colleague, Mr. Brissette, is expected to join us a bit later, and he's going to handle strategy and technique, and I'm going to handle sources. Before I start the slideshow or the slide deck, just by show of hands or in the chat, can you indicate if it is that you are a student, undergraduate student? I just want to get a sense as to who's in the audience today. Show of hands or in the chat. Thank you. Great. And next, you could put down your hand yeah. So we have about 5 persons. And what about postgrad students? Yeah. Show of hands or in the chat. Thank you. And I'm seeing some librarian colleagues. So I will ask librarians or library staff. Show of hands or in the chat. Right, so a few as well. Okay, great. So I'm going to get started. Let me just share my slides. Right, and can you please indicate, you can unmute your mic. Just let me know, somebody, if it is that you're seeing the slides.
Yeah, we're seeing the slides.
Okay, great. So I'm focusing today on recommended sources, and it's the academic librarian's perspective. I have to say, based on the audience, I don't think I'm going to be saying anything too revolutionary. So it's either going to reassure you that you're on the right track or you're getting there, and maybe you will leave here learning a thing or two. And of course, I'm using the opportunity as a librarian. We learn all the time from patrons, staff, students, faculty, external clientele about sources. So if it is that there's a source in your jurisdiction that you want to share, please do so in the chat. I'm taking note because I will be using your recommendations to enhance my own resources and teaching. Before I begin any training or session on locating materials, I find it to be very important to consider the sources of legal information. So past students, current students, if you've ever sat in on a presentation with me, this is not going to be a surprise to you, right? So these are the sources of legal information that I would like you to consider from the perspective of conducting legal research. It is my recommendation that you consider using tertiary or secondary sources first and then primary. So tertiary sources are things like bibliographies, research guides, pathfinders, compilations, listings created by experts in the field or persons who are interested in an area. The philosophy is really why duplicate efforts. If there's somebody who's already compiled a list that might get you started on research, tertiary sources really would help you along, okay? The next source that I really think is important would be, in terms of sources of legal information, would be secondary sources. So my explanation to everyone is really and truly, those are items or titles or materials that give you commentary, criticism, analysis, overview of the law. We're talking about books, journal articles, textbooks, student level, practitioner level, research materials. Okay, So instead of diving straight into the law itself, which is really primary sources of legal information, your cases, your legislation, you go to secondary sources. This is very useful when you don't know anything about the topic, you don't know much, you want to know more, you want to enhance your understanding. Secondary sources will point you to other secondary sources. So just by looking at the in-text references or the footnotes, the bibliography, whatever work cited, you're going to get referred to other secondary sources, books, journals, and cases on point, legislation on point. So you come away from a secondary source knowing more. You move from a position of maybe knowing nothing or very little to knowing something or very much more than you started off with. And you can track from there. The philosophy is known as the one good thing or one known thing strategy in terms of searching. And it's then I would move on to primary sources. So I have my list when I leave secondary sources with recommendations for other secondary sources, named cases, named pieces of legislation, and then I track from there. So I would encourage you, you can put in a chat if it is that you have another strategy that you recommend. But I was asked that at least in this particular presentation to focus on the academic component of legal research. So this strategy is one that I always recommend to students, and whether they're law or outside of the field or discipline. And in terms of recommended sources, this is my top 10. There are many, many more. And what I will say to you is I have a list of links that I will share with you a bit later. At the end of the presentation, I'll paste my links in the chat, and you can have a closer look at the things I'm about to show you, okay? So bibliographies, this would be one of the tertiary sources. Commonwealth Caribbean legal materials are select subject bibliography. So this is an oldie, but a goodie. Okay, if it is that you are really looking to get started on Caribbean research and you don't know much or you want some recommendations, even though it's quite dated, you can get a head start here. Somebody, okay, librarian from Caville at the time had put together it's pretty extensive, an extensive list of materials. And I tried to get a little snapshot of the intro. Materials authored or edited by librarians and members of the legal community. What's nice about this bibliography is that it is divided by subject. So if it is that you're researching a particular area and you go to this bibliography, it's published in the International Journal of Legal Information, you can get recommendations on your topic. So books, articles, and whatnot. Fantastic. All right, now I do acknowledge that it is dated. So I do have a suggestion for you as to how you can update that listing, because obviously there have been things published after 2003. So the next source, and I don't know how many of you use a library catalog like this. Not all library catalogs are like this, but it may encourage you to check out whatever library catalog that you have access to and see if it offers that option. But these are two very law specific. One emanates from the Court Library Services of the Judiciary of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Their database or catalog includes analytical entries, meaning the staff of the Court Library Services Unit have taken the time to create entries for Caribbean content. This example that I have on screen here shows you an article coming out of the West Indian Law Journal as published in 2004. So if it is that you know your area of law and you've already consulted the bibliography that I've suggested, then maybe this is a way that you can update. Go to this catalog, search for the area by subject, topic, and see if there are any articles subsequent to 2003 that have been included in this catalog. And then you can take note of the citation and try to track down the article by consulting whatever library that you have access to. The next catalog will be familiar to many of you, and that is the online catalog, the web OPAC of the Hewitting Law School. And they also include analytical entries. So I actually find it useful to consult both sources, because no source is going to necessarily be totally comprehensive. So it may well be that an article may not have been indexed or cataloged by one source and included in another. Same article. So I've actually showed you the same article as indexed or captured by another library. And the subject keywords are also very useful for research because electronic resource, very, very fortunate in the sense that you get hyperlink to full text or hyperlink to other entries depending on the source. So in this case, you're hyperlinked to other entries in this tool described with the same keywords or subject. My next source would be books. I think this is an obvious one, but if it is that we have persons in the audience who aren't familiar with legal research, one series that you really want to take note of is the Commonwealth Caribbean Law series. This was published by Taylor and Francis. It's 19 series titles. It doesn't, of course, mean that it's completely exhaustive in terms of the areas of law that you might be interested in, but it's certainly a major series that if it is that you're considering doing research and there is a title in this series on your topic, it's well worth your while to consult that title. Of course, that being said, Caribbean researchers can publish in any publishing using any publication house. So do not limit yourself to this series, but it's a great starting point. Next up, I have journals. So you would want to consider journals emanating out of the Caribbean, first and foremost, I think. And I have some titles on screen that may well be of interest to you. Caribbean Law Bulletin, the Caribbean Law Review, the UWI St. Augustine Law Journal. So that's a plug for the journal emanating out of our very own campus, and the West Indian Law Journal. I'm only calling out a few. Some of these listed on screen are no longer active, but they're still very much cited today. What you want to note is that the publications may be available in print and or electronic format. It depends on the publication. So for example, I can tell you that the West Indian Law Journal at the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus, we subscribe to EBSCO-host, and we do have access to a few volumes and issues of the West Indian Law Journal in electronic format from that database. I think UWI Press now has the West Indian Law Journal as hosted on another platform, which would be Book Fusion. So it depends on the particular publication, but very much some of these publications, some of them, they can only be found in print. So you will have to consult your library and see if it is they have a particular publication and which year's volumes issues. So theses and dissertations, I think that this is a wonderful source for academic research and often overlooked by students. It may well be that there's somebody who has conducted research, either the master's or PhD level, on a topic, on an area that you are interested in. With that in mind, I've profiled here the University of the West Indies Institutional Repository, UWI Space. There's a community on the University of the West Indies thesis collection. So we definitely have the PhD theses here digitized. It takes a bit of time for theses to make their way into our collection. So if it is that you're looking for something and it's not here, I would recommend that you get in touch with your respective librarian or library. So if it is that you're a member of the University of West Indies community, you should have full text access if it's available in this collection from on and off campus. If it is that you're not a member of this community, the recommendation is that you liaise with us through your library. So it's a library to library relationship when it comes to inquiring about access to theses and dissertations. And for those of you also who are attached to academic institutions, it may well be that you your institution subscribes to ProQuest Dissertations and Theses Global. So that collection that I showed you before, very specific to the University of the West Indies, but Caribbean people are traveling people. We are all over the world. So a person could be in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and want to do research on their home country or just have an interest in the Caribbean and produce research at the master's or PhD level. And ProQuest dissertations and theses global may have that thesis or dissertation in full text. And even if it's available in abstract format, it's still a starting point. Right. I'm just going to check the chat. Is it only possible if you're a UE student or Hewarding student? So I hope I answered that question. I'm going to check the chat after the presentation, right? And reports and judgments. So I'm getting into the law itself. So we've started the process by going through tertiary sources, secondary sources, and we're getting a list of cases and legislation, and we're trying to track them down. Major sources of Caribbean content would be the law reports emanating out of the Caribbean. So I have a few on screen. I don't pretend that this presentation is going to be exhaustive. I have, 20, 30 minutes, and I'm watching my time, right?
Well, Ms. Raji, just to let you know,
yeah.
our colleague, Mr. Brissette, is actually having serious internet connection problems in St. Lucia because of the storm. So he cannot actually get onto Zoom. So I think we will have to reschedule his part of the presentation. So that gives you more time. To everyone, I know you probably want to hear that part as well because they're very complimentary, but I will be in touch with the reschedule. Because, you know, sometimes we can't really control the internet problems. We have been experiencing some severe weather. So, Ms. Raji, you continue on with that in mind.
Okay, so I'm happy to answer questions about sources and technique after. Yeah, so I've just profiled a few on screen: Barbados law reports, Jamaica law reports, major series West Indian reports. What you would want to note, of course, is that some reports are more regularly published than others. So for those of you who have done research on Trinidad and Tobago and have been looking for the Trinidad and Tobago law reports, our series has not been updated for quite some time. Okay. And also, these titles may or may not be available in electronic format as well. So I do know, for example, if I'm not mistaken, the Eastern Caribbean law reports electronic format. Of course, the West Indian reports, and you will see a slide on Lexis a bit later, available in print and electronic format. So I'm just giving a few examples. Depending on where you're based, the library that you're attached to, you may have access to these materials in both formats, if they're available in both formats, or one format print. Yeah. So I'm moving on to electronic resources. Lexis Plus UK hosts two major series that would be of interest to Caribbean researchers: the Law Reports of the Commonwealth and the West Indian Reports. You can also access Caribbean cases at the Privy Council level through the judgment collection here, but the Privy Council has its own website, and you don't necessarily need to go through Lexis to access those decisions. Next up is VLEX Justice. For those of you who may have been in the system for a while, you're a practitioner, you're a student, at least I would say in the past 10 years, you would have seen the transition from CARI Law, which is that standalone database that emanates from the Law Library, Cavell Campus, University of the West Indies, to the content being here in VLEX Justice. If it is that you're looking for a Caribbean case and you don't have access to a judgment collection, for example, like the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus, spaces are a real issue for us. So we don't collect judgments. This particular database is very, very essential to our students and staff research and study concerning the Caribbean. So for Caribbean cases emanating out of the courts, Caribbean core collection, CARI Law content, very, very useful. What you would want to note here, of course, is that you're not going to get every Caribbean case in this collection. And your next port of call really ought to be, if it is that you're not finding the case here, to check with your respective library to see if they have it in print, if you didn't do so, because some persons may naturally gravitate towards searching for material in electronic format first. And then you will want to consult the website for the respective court to see if it is that the judgment is available there. And if not, then you're liaising with your library to see if you can track down. All right, meaning if it is that you attach an institution, I think the preference really is for you to make that request to the respective court or court library through your library or librarian. Yeah. And then we have some homegrown databases, paid databases. So the Industrial Court of Trinidad and Tobago has a judgment database. You can, as a member of the public, see limited content, but in order to see more, including full text, subscription is needed. So at the University of Western St. Augustine campus, we do have a subscription. The subscription is such that only a few of us staff members in the library have username or password. So it really depends on, of course, the institution that you're attached to and the finances, how many passwords. So in this case, I can contrast access here with perhaps something like VLEX Justice or Lexis. So at the University of Western East St. Augustine campus, VLEX Justice and Lexis Plus are resources that our entire campus have access to. Through a proxy method of authentication. So once persons can identify themselves as bona fide members of the UE student staff community, they have access to Lexis Plus, VLEX Justice from on and off campus. And this is another homegrown database. This is the Trinidad and Tobago tax cases. It's the database emanating out of the Tax Appeal Board. This is a subscribed database. It's very niche and it's definitely on my wish list. So far, finances have not permitted us to subscribe, but it's certainly something that I think persons who are interested in tax law, Caribbean, may want to consider. Please, if you have resource suggestions. So I'm profiling resources that I'm aware of. My work has had me interact or I've encountered these things, but I'm interested in if it is that there's something else. So if it is that you're working in another jurisdiction and there are paid databases emanating out of your jurisdiction, please share in the chat. I'm sure persons would be very, very interested. So library catalogs as a finding tool for cases. Now, I could have probably put this at the beginning where I included library catalogs as a source for journals, but I did want to put this piece with the cases. So I'm profiling once again, the catalog or the search databases feature of the Judiciary of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, the Court Library Services Unit. And what you're seeing here is a record for a case. This is a local case, Trinidad and Tobago, Court of Appeal, but look very carefully at the record. If you look carefully, and I would think that the practitioners definitely and our postgrad students, Hewitting Law School students, but if it is that you're out of that grouping, you may not necessarily have interacted with the catalog in this way if you interacted with it at all. So this is something really interesting. Not all catalogs are going to do this, so I want you to also consider if you're joining us from another jurisdiction. I'm profiling an example from Trinidad, but I also would be interested to hear if it is that your particular court, the jurisdiction that you're operating in, offers a feature like this. So this record for the case includes useful information for the researcher, because I'm still operating from the strategy of the one known thing or one good thing strategy, in the sense that once I find one thing, I can find more. So I found one case. Okay, and the examples that I've been using actually are domestic violence examples. So what you would have seen earlier when I did a screenshot of the catalogs for outlining or giving an analytical entry for a journal, the journal article was dealing with domestic violence. So this is a case on domestic violence. It's Mohammed, and also known as Punchin, and the state. If you look really carefully at this record, we are seeing that the library staff, librarians, took the time to extract, okay, persons responsible for maintaining the database, took the time to extract specifically cases referred to, okay, but specifically Commonwealth Caribbean cases. So you didn't actually need to open up the full text, although the full text is available here, and go through the document in order to find these references. They've extracted it for you. So you have something to work with. All right, and you have the citation, you have the parties' names, you have the citation. I think that is really useful. Other things that can appear in this catalog would be legislation referred to, and then a history of the case. So this is an entry that did not include those things, but I would encourage you to look out for those things. Legislation. Now, I didn't have a standalone slide on legislation because I think actually in the past few years, Caribbean legislation has become increasingly available, accessible. So if it is that you're looking for Caribbean legislation, you can, I think, consider who would be responsible for putting out that legislation, and if it is that they have a website, and visit that website. In the case of Trinidad and Tobago, we have the Parliament's website, we have news.gov.tt, we have laws.gov.tt, all giving us access full text to legislation. What I'm profiling here instead is the finding tool. So you have you're interested in a piece of legislation, you want to find out about changes to that legislation, amendments. There's an act with their related legal notices put out under that act, rules, regulations, orders, when, what are the numbers? So legal notice number what, proclamation dates, all those kinds of things you can find out from a very nifty tool. Now, this is something I actually think, well, practitioners are going to know very well. You winning law students, hoping that you know, I think so. But if it is that you're joining outside of that grouping, and my librarian colleagues, right? This might be something new to you. Very, very, very useful tool. And what I'm showing you actually is a screenshot from the consolidated index page of the law library cable, because this is a product, this is a publication that emanates out of the law library. All right. They're showing you the territory and how up to date the index is. So the index is quite up to date for Antigua, Bahamas, and so on. All right, so you can get, if it is that this is something that you don't have access to as a practitioner, this is the landing page also for subscription information. And for those who don't know, I've extracted just a snapshot. This is a snapshot of the Environmental Management Act, the entry 4. This is an old one. I had to look through my files because I'd been working on these slides feverishly, and I realized, oh, it might be useful to include a slide, but it's not the most up-to-date index, but it still gives you an idea of how useful this tool can be. So you're seeing the chapter reference, amendments, what sections were amended, by what, yeah, and so on. And you have the numbers to work with. So you move from a point of knowing just the act to all these things related to the act. Very, very useful. And as we wind down, at least as I wind down with the sources, I want to profile special collections. Postgraduate students, faculty may be interested in doing research and looking for a unique topic or area to explore. Don't forget special collections. In the case of the West Indiana and Special Collections Unit or Division, at the University of West Indies St. Augustine campus, the Alma Jordan Library. These are 3 special collections that contain legal materials or related to the law. So there's a J.D. Sealy and Company records, heavily demanded, I think, now for genealogical research. The Muslim coup documents that were gifted to us by Justice Nelson and the Wooding Fraser papers. So if it is that you're interested in these special collections, you can get in touch with the West Indiana Special Collections Division here at the Alma Jordan Library. And I would encourage you to consider, if it is that you are attached to an academic institution, if it is that the supporting library or network of libraries offers special collections that might be of research interest to you. And last but not least, of course, a recommended resource would be the library staff, your librarians. We're here to help you. We're here to help you. If it is that you're looking for something and you can't find it, don't stay silent and suffer. Get in touch with us. Okay, we have our networks. So I didn't introduce myself, and I should have done that. But okay, so I'm the law librarian at the Alma Jordan Library. I've been here for over a decade. I actually worked with the very first cohort of faculty of law graduates here. So I've been here for a while. Prior to that, I've been the librarian at the Environmental Commission and the Inland Revenue Division. And outside of that, in terms of professional outreach or commitment, I'm the past president of the Caribbean Association of Law Libraries. I see our current president here. So hello to Ms. Douglas and Mr. Brissette, also past president of the Caribbean Association of Law Libraries. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take questions, seeing that it's just me. And to take suggestions as well. If it is that there are resources that you want to profile or you wish you had seen, but the component that I opted to focus on was really the sources. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Good afternoon, Ms. Raja. If I can just speak, I didn't put up my hands. I'm not hearing
Sure.
anyone. That's okay. Well, first of all, Ria Mohammed Pollard at the Caribbean Court of Justice.
Yes.
I am not a librarian, but I know your face, and I'm sure we know each other.
We do.
From you.
We did
yes.
International relations together.
I know we did something. I just
Yes.
can't. I can see the face, and thank you very much for the presentation. I don't really have a question per se, more of if I can just take a plug here for the Caribbean Court of Justice, because I've heard you refer to a lot of legal sources. And of course, I've heard you refer to the Privy Council and so forth. So I was just going to ask if I can just give a little plug on our website as well, being one of the secondary sources, the Caribbean Court of Justice, because we do have a tab for OPAC for our library.
Yes.
That you can access because, you know, we are based in Trinidad, as well as we have in our resources on the website, the digest of the original jurisdiction cases. And I love your little catchphrase of the one good thing. And that stuck with me, the one good thing. The one good thing that we can send, what I can speak to is under our original jurisdiction. We have very known cases throughout the region that persons can use as secondary source, primary source of case law as well. So I just wanted to give that a little plug. And we do have another project that is not quite completed, and you may have heard of it. One of our strengthening knowledge assets really is the knowledge management system, which is known as the CJIS, the Caribbean Judicial Instruments, really. So that is upcoming, and you'll be able to find all easy access to judgments and so forth. So I just wanted to give a little plug there and say thank you for putting out this class this afternoon, and I do hope I can hear Damian, a colleague of ours, as well in the other session.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Everyone, yes. So you will get access to cases from the respective the websites of respective courts. Not every court in the Caribbean will offer full text judgments, and our speaker before indicated Caribbean Court of Justice, visit their website. We had a question as well in the chat about unreported cases. So really and truly, the source for unreported cases would be VLEX Justice, that Caribbean Court collection, and then the court itself. Okay, if the website for the court has a section that offers full text access to judgments, or a library that collects print copies of judgments. What I'm putting in the chat would be all the sources that I referred to in my presentation. I'm also going to put my contact information, and certainly we can take more questions, Dr. Perot, from the floor.
Yeah, we have time for more questions. So just to let you all know, I have been in contact with Mr. Brissette because he was able to send emails, but he couldn't get onto the Zoom. We know how it goes. And he said he should be available on the 27th of October. So I will send around an email about that to reschedule the second part of this presentation. That being said, I think we've had some very interesting information from Ms. Raja here today. As I said, Ms. Raja is the best librarian I have ever worked with, and I did all of my degrees in the UK. So I've had experience with loads of librarians in many different institutions. And my first foray into research in UE, it was really through getting Ms. Raja's help. Keeping in mind, because I didn't study in the Caribbean, I didn't have any type of background in understanding how to access these sources. So having Ms. Rogers' help and learning from her has been so instrumental for me, because obviously to teach in the region, I needed to understand how do I access regional sources. So I have to say I'm so grateful to you, Ms. Rogers, for that. And I think people have definitely learned from the information you shared today. And anybody who has any questions, feel free. Now is your opportunity. And do look out for the email about the rescheduling with Mr. Brissette, who will come to us from the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, hopefully with a strong internet connection when we are able to do that rescheduling.
Or any source suggestions. So I saw that Antonio put in a source suggestion for me. Thank you so much. So one of the resources that I've been linking you to is my legal information resources guide. It's a guide that I already created to support staff and students here, but it's publicly available. So it profiles subscribed resources, free resources, print, electronic, and I'm constantly adding to the list as I come across sources. So your recommendations, your suggestions are super, super useful to me. Yes, so Fenella, you're asking if the resources in the chat can be sent as an email as well. Yes, I have it actually as a Word document, so I'm happy to share it. Let me see. I wonder if I can embed it here as, let's see. I'll send it to Dr. Perot, and she can, if it's okay, Dr. Perot, can you circulate it to attendees?
Yes, sure. So everyone who's on the mailing list, I'll be able to send it to them, and I will, you know what? I have the registration from the Zoom. So yes, that is fine. I will send it through the Zoom
Sure.
registration.
So I'll send you the document as soon as our session is finished. So
Great.
everyone's quiet. I'm here, and I did, when I invited my colleagues, I did tell them no hard questions. So maybe there's a librarian who wants to ask a question. Or wants to say anything about legal research. We have other experts in our midst. So I'm seeing representatives from the Caribbean Court of Justice. I'm seeing the librarian from, I don't want to put them on the spot, but UB Mona.
So while people are thinking, I think it's worth noting that research as a whole can be something that can seem intimidating when you're just getting started, especially when you think of the product of research. For most of us will be the writing aspect. And of course, if you're a practitioner, there's going to be more to it than that. And it depends what your end goal is. But research can seem intimidating because you think I have to produce something. Let's say I have a research paper. As a student, I have to come up with 3,000 words at the end of this research. I think part of doing effective research is thinking, well, where am I starting? And when you start something, start taking notes and developing your thoughts. Because it can seem like I have so much information to process. Look at all these amazing sources I have. How am I ever going to get through this? So I think being able to figure out your own note-taking strategy, whether it is bullet points, whether it is highlighting, whether it's adding something to the documents, can be a good starting point to really gather your thoughts, because that thought gathering process is really the first step to thinking, well, where do I go from here? So breaking it down piece by piece can make something that seems like a huge mountain a lot easier in terms of taking the first step, just one step at a time. But I see a hand is up, so I will now hand over to Myrna, whose hand is up for a question.
Okay, so I just want to underscore that it was an excellent presentation. My colleague there from St. Augustine, Jolie, and I see absolutely no gaps. But I just want to add that we should also remember the pepper and heart approach, and to remind our audience that there is the avenue from, in terms of secondary sources, such as Hansard's, parliamentary proceedings and so on, where we can look to see, what were the intention of the parliaments, the lawmakers, when they are making new law in terms of the Hansard's proceedings and other and just general information on why and how the legislation was passed. So those are some of the things. And then although it is a external source and not a Caribbean source, our command papers out of the UK seem to have had a great level of influence on lawmaking in the Caribbean as well. So just those two I would like to mention.
Thank you. And as a related note, there may be additional background material coming out of the parliament of your jurisdiction or whatever is the equivalent. So for example, I know we have persons from parliament here, parliament in Trinidad, the Bill Essentials, which is a document that comes out of the research unit there, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I stand to be corrected, is very, very useful for background material on a upcoming piece of legislation. So we have questions in the chat. Is it okay if I respond to those questions, Dr. Perot?
Sure, if you could just read out the question for the purpose of the
Sure.
recording, that would be great.
Okay, so we have a question here. How do you know where to get it or find it? Unreported cases. Do you need to know the name of the unreported case to find it, or is there a way to find unreported cases? So unreported cases are cases that do not appear in any published series of law reports. So your sources are, if it is that you have access to VLEX Justice Caribbean Core Collection, that is one source. You will need to know something about the case. If you're looking for a specific case, it would be helpful to know something about it, what the parties' names, which jurisdiction it emanates from, the year of the decision. But using an electronic tool, I think, can help you to overcome some of those hurdles. If it is that it's not in VLEX Justice, then there will be a greater challenge because you're looking for the item in print, either from a law library that collects print judgments. So for example, the June Rennie Law Library, I know that we have a librarian here from that library, collects judgments. You will need to know very specific information, parties' names, jurisdiction, year of decision, and more, right? That would be useful. Or if it is that you're contacting the court, yeah, you will also want to check the court's website before contacting the court, because the judgment could also be available there in electronic format. Right. Antonio is asking, are the UE law reports available electronically? Do you mean the journal?
Yes, the law journal, thank you.
The law journal is currently hosted on the faculty's website. So I think we can probably put the link in the chat. Let's see.
Sure, I'll get the link, Ms. Roger.
You'll get the link? Okay, great. Anyone else? And I'll encourage my fellow librarians also to chime in. We have experts in our midst.
I haven't put my hand up. May I ask?
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
Barbara Johnson, tutor, Hewden Law School.
Yes.
And it's really a bit of guidance. How do you respond to a student who has put Google in the bibliography of a research paper?
Okay, not that I'm stumped, right? But I'm actually quite surprised, because I would think that at that level, Google as just Google as a source, or something emanating out of a web search.
In the bibliography, just Google. And the thing about it is that we've had such extensive research seminars done by our librarians, who are amazing individuals. But yet still we get that in some of our research papers.
So what I've been telling students is the things that appear on their worksheets and reading lists are really preparing them for what it is they're expected, the kind of material that they ought to cite. So if it is that you're reading actively, you're reading material from a textbook or a journal, you should also be paying attention to what those things are citing. That's the kind of material you ought to be citing. So when I speak to students, I say, do you see the judge citing Google? Do you see the judge citing Wikipedia? Now, there might be a reason for doing so, meaning that there's some point you want to illustrate, but what would the judge do, or what would my tutor say, or what would my lecturer say? It, to me, is really the answering call when selecting sources. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I hope the students have listened a bit. Thank you so much. And thank you for the presentation. It has been a really good one. Thank you.
It's a whirlwind tour, and I see Miss Douglas' hand is up. I don't know if I've missed anyone else's hand.
Okay, the question of Google has come up in my environment, but mostly with undergraduate students, because that is what you're used to from high school. And part of the responsibility, I believe, of librarians is to teach the students how to use Google responsibly, because you cannot really stop them from accessing Google and getting there. And so I usually start out that kind of teaching by telling the students that Google is one of the best things since sliced bread. I'm not sure if that terminology, that saying is a Jamaican saying. And then I guide them how to use Google responsibly in terms of and where on Google to go, Google Scholar, highlighting things like Google Scholar, highlighting how to use the assessment criteria for assessing the material they get from Google and to see whether they are credible sources, how to determine all of that. And in that way, they understand that it is the content from Google that they are using, and they would be able to discriminate using the content. But you can't reach everybody. So I believe that one student may have crept up and put on Google as a source per se. But Google is a usable source for materials that are credible, authentic, and of high quality, refereed, and so on. And those are some of the things that you have to emphasize in training them.
Yep. We have somebody else. Anybody else? Thank you, Ms. Douglas.
Yeah,
Very,
thank
very
you, Ms.
useful.
Douglas.
Anyone else? So you have some experts in the audience who are willing to answer questions. Anybody else? Yes. So we're hearing about materials emanating. So there's a comment that went before. This is from Elron. And we're getting references to regional judiciaries also produce bench books and handbooks, which may be useful. So the JRTT, for example, has their ebook platform, which contains, yes, the consolidated index, sentencing handbook, criminal bench book, and so on. Very, very useful material. The Caribbean Association of Judicial Officers, we have bench book. So these are things that I will also take note of. I refer, because I'm dealing mostly with undergraduate students, I refer them to the bench book for actually citation guidance, but I will include those resources. Yeah, and we're seeing a reference from Nila Gosain. I recommend the use of Butterworth's Halsbury, UK Supreme Court website, legislation.gov.uk, All England Law Reports, All England Reporter. Thank you. Right, so
I think this brings us nicely to the end of the presentation. I think we've learned a lot today in terms of how do we go about conducting Caribbean research, or we need to know where we are going. But a very, very interesting question on putting Google in the bibliography, which is
just plain Google.
a little shocking, honestly. But mistakes can be made. But hopefully, we've learned today that yes, Google is a great tool for us to figure out where do we go from there. But we want to make sure we're actually citing the source that we ultimately refer to. And you can think of it like this. If you publish something, you've probably put time and work into it, and you would like your research to be properly attributed to you. So while you might have found it on Google, giving the actual information is very important. And think of it like this as well. Future researchers need to see your footnotes or your bibliography, as the case may be, so that they can then go and look up this information as well. Which brings us back to the importance of proper citation or scholar, all those things that sometimes as students we don't necessarily like to put the time into, but they are very, very important. And as researchers, super important for us as well, because if we are reading something, we want to be able to figure out where this material come from, how can we continue the research, and by looking at the citations, that helps us a lot. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Ms. Raja, for this excellent presentation. I see a final comment in the chat for practitioners. Some practice directions from some jurisdictions, court websites can also provide research guidance, including very important citation guidance. So, Mr. Rogers,
I don't want to preempt Mr. Brissette, but Mr. Brissette's focus would have been on the practitioner aspect, and some of these things he may have touched on. Yeah.
Yes, so we will hopefully hear from him
Hopefully,
in the next
yeah.
few weeks once the internet stabilizes.
Yeah.
In fact, I had an internet problem this morning, which was a bit alarming since I had to start this seminar, but it all resolved. But we will hear from Mr. Brissette in a few weeks when we're able to reschedule, and I hope to see you all at that presentation as well. This presentation has been recorded and it will be on the UE St. Augustine Faculty of Law's YouTube site. Do follow us on LinkedIn and X, formerly known as Twitter, because we talk about events there. Many of you on the mailing list, so you'll get the details for our next seminar, which is on the role of research in policy making. That's on October 20th, and the flyer for that will be circulated soon. So thank you, everyone in the audience. Thank you for the very useful comments that we have gotten. Final comment here on, is there a publication on proper citation? So we don't have a Caribbean publication on proper citation, but citation style really depends on what you are writing and where the research is ultimately going to end up. We often use our Scholar, and our Scholar is freely available if you just search it online. The Oxford website will have our Scholar. If it is you want to use something like the Blue Book, that is not freely available, but UWE's library does have a copy of it. But there are a multitude of referencing styles, so it depends on which referencing style you actually meant to be complying with in your writing. For us, generally though, we are using our Scholar, and it's a very fairly straightforward. There's also the Scholar Quick Guide, which I find super helpful in terms of being a one-page PDF. If you want to go into more detail, you do need to look at the entire guide. Thank you, everyone, for these questions and comments, and thank you, Ms. Raja, for an excellent presentation.
You're welcome. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.